Oh, I was just going to say, was it just a shameless plug for Mucinex or something
Oh,
like that?
hashtag not sponsored, but I wouldn't turn down a Mucinex, right?
Hey, they can pay us. It's all good.
Um, so Pelicans had put a quandary in our RPG workshop, and maybe this is something that you can help out with, Technatron. Pelicans is running a last-minute session 0 for his or her seafaring campaign tomorrow. The party was meant to start on a ship, but I thought it'd be fun if we could play them getting to the ship, because they seem to want a session 0. I have 6 players, and they're all level 5. Do you think there's a way to give them a ship without giving them a ship? In other words, do you think there's a way to do it that seems plausible?
I would say I personally would go with the kind of more the biking route or more the pirating route, because that's something that has kind of been done throughout stories and stuff like that. So it's kind of already ingrained in us. So I would go with an aggressive front in attacking a ship. Um, if you can get your players kind of in the mindset of like, there's these people you need to take down and go blow up their ship. We don't care what you do with it. The thing is that is a good way to get them into the sea and give them a ship, but also give them an opportunity to take over a ship. So get into kind of that pillaging and hostile takeover. People seem to line up with that like bread and butter. And that
Mm-hmm.
would also be a good way to get the players in a setting for the session 0 to see how everyone works. And then you could sit them down on the ship and kind of explain what they're going to do. And you've kind of solved that problem all at once. A little long winded, but I think that works.
I think it does. Um, Mine is a little bit. Uh, Maybe it's stereotypical. It would be an in media res, or in media res, as some might call it, where you start in the middle of the action, and it could very well be you're already being boarded, or there's naval combat, or both. The officers, the ranking officers, are dead or missing, and Pelicans, you sit down with your, you see all the player characters are there. You set up the scene. If it's session 0, right? They haven't really stepped up. They're just next in line. And suddenly, deckhands come over. The captain's dead. What do we do? And that's how you start your session. And then you narrate that there's this combat going on. And so for this session 0, or the first couple, they have a ship, but they won't necessarily have a ship if it sinks, or if it's captured, or if something else happens, if they have to abandon ship. And so it puts them immediately in command to start, thinking about using their abilities, their powers, their influence, their commands. And then it wraps things up with the fight. And then, it's a session 0, whatever, 5 years can pass, or something happens where they all think that they lost each other because there's an explosion below the deck. And then your session 1 is 5 years later, when they've all been brought back together by a mysterious letter that all of them received. And then they can recount their tales from when they were kind of thrust into, a command of a squad of repellers or something. So that could be a way to give them a ship for a session, give them some authority and command, and then take that away without while having the experience be meaningful, and everything contributes to the story, but you're not demeaning or stripping down the characters because of the circumstances.
Yeah, that totally works.
McFluffy Muffin says, I just came from a campaign that had us all start out as kind of captives, and I didn't join till later, but they managed to take the ship. Roger Twy says, I'd go with there's a ship that came into harbor, dropped anchor, hoisted a quarantine flag, and has just sat there lifeless. The harbor master says anyone who rows out there can just have it, if they can have it. Ooh, Roger, that's a cool one too. Man, you're just dropping a mystery, very literally, right in the middle of the port. And it's not exactly a race, well, maybe amongst a few folks, but it's not like a bunch of people want to go and board a quarantine ship where there's been no responses.
Yeah, get ready to roll Constitution.
Yeah. I was running with the idea that maybe the ship is cursed or something and someone is trying to pawn it off quickly. My players seem to want something that isn't combat. A skill challenge would be excellent for that, I think. It could be done through some bartering, some social interactions, things like that. Do you have a non-combat situation for Pelicans, Technatron? And then we can, maybe we could even bridge from this into NPC stuff.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for something that you can do, nothing's better than wagers. There's 3 Dragon Ante, all sorts of stuff, and you can have them kind of rig like a casino or some type of betting operation where, unbeknownst to them, they can end up with a ship or maybe a part of a ship, so they'll have ownership of it, but they don't control it. And that way you can play up like kind of a 007 type sting operation. And that could be really fun. That's like not full on combat, but could turn into combat, so it still has that tension. And maybe that's the kind of the plug. 007 has great NPCs.
Yeah. Very memorable. And they fill their niches very well.
Oh, definitely. And yeah, that was kind of one of the things, and that is a perfect example, like from your Odd Job to Jaws. They're literal in what they kind of are. Like the Odd Job has his hat, Jaws has his jaws. And the thing is those become very iconic villains and NPCs throughout those type of movies. But the point that I was going to bring up is, yeah, an NPC for them to first pop out is there has to be something that meets your eye or draws an interest. And descriptors are probably one of the best things that you can do, because there's a guy, let's say, blue shirt, black beard, and has elven ears, but a very like green complexion. The thing is that is a description, but it's not going to draw in a player. But if we give them something more, like there's a person in a very deep blue shirt, eyes that go on forever, face weathered, their body looks like they've just come from a great depression or some hardship. You can see almost in their swaggered walk. Just descriptions and putting more emphasis on that, like, instantly draws people's eye to that character.
So you're saying if I just describe, there's an elven town guard as you approach the village, that's not exactly making a memorable impact. And maybe not all NPCs have to be super iconic, but just describing someone as an elven guard. I mean, wizards can be guards. Fighters and barbarians can be guards, and there's many different types of elves.
Well, and that's completely true, and you don't have to go much further. You can, what I like to do is kind of passing things where you start describing multiple characters, but one stands out with just a feather in their hat or something like that. They have an insignia pin in their shirt. anything that makes that one person stand out makes your thought process more go to them out of a crowd.
So in this case, you could describe as you approach the village, there are several guards that are mulling about. Though there's one that's walking out towards your wagon with her hand extended, and she has a yellow feather in her cap.
Yeah, something as simple as that. Uh, like just for instance, we take that same thing. There's a group of paladins standing in front of the doorway blocking it. You notice that they have a red banner that they fly behind them, but one seems to be missing a limb. He, that right there is already saying, well, one's missing a limb. Why are they guard? You can give more description if something asks of it, but just the fact of someone missing an arm will instantly draw attention to that person and that group.
Replying to McFluffy Muffin here as you were making a very good point. Uh, Insert anime main characters and their colored hair. And in all honesty, McFluffy Muffin, that's how we came to have wildly colored hair and anime hairstyles. If you take a look at the medium back when it was black and white for anime, let alone manga, the style is very similar. And especially when it's coming from a country that is rather homogeneous in its population, this is a way that you can differentiate the characters from each other even more. When, if you're working in gray tone, you need shape, especially to help define the outline of the character. In Technatron, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that you are a student of the arts. If you're doing some character design, if you want it to be impactful, and this could definitely bleed over into something to meet the eye as an NPC creator. You want people to be able to pick out your character in a crowd very easily and quickly. You want people to be able to imagine it, to invoke it very quickly and powerfully.
And yeah, and there's multiple ways to go about it. Describing a brooding face with a maw, like, already makes something stand out. You don't have to do the classic cartoon where they point every sign towards the villain and then a stack of dynamite falls on them. Although you could, it's like, have fun. But we don't need Acme to get involved all the time. But yeah, you very much can just do simple things inside of art and inside of storytelling that give more texture, I would say. Just like even strokes of a pencil, if you shade something, it looks rounder and more soft. The same approach is true with words and descriptors.
I agree, and I love that you use texture, even when describing a fictional written character. And I'm not just talking about things like you said, a weathered face, and of course that will have texture, but texture does give you that feeling, even if we're invoking it in our imagination, that this is something that we can feel. I think that goes back to what you were talking about last night about your definition of art. Is it manifests things that don't exist and it makes them real
Oh yeah,
because it gives
totally.
fantasy texture.
Hmm. Well, and James is making a good point too.
Yep.
It doesn't even have to be something you see. It could be a smell, their quirks that they have. Uh, all those things are emphases on uh, like a person and who they are. And and yeah, giving them more that gritting feel. It really creates impact before you even give their narrative. um, Telling the story of the person in description before you even get to how they talk to a person or introduce themselves is really going to pave the way towards the hook or where you're going with those things. And you really want people to bite on one of your NPCs, because us as a dungeon master, we're going to have a much harder time uh, leading a bunch of cats in a direction.
It can feel like herding cats at times.
Yes.
And I do like smell, as it's something that I think a lot of us might overlook. And yet, from all of our senses, I mean, unless you think that, psychic powers are a sixth sense, of our 5 traditional senses, our sense of smell, our olfactory receptors, are the one sense that are directly connected to our brains. And that is why smells can invoke memories. Even in some studies have shown that, for people who have different levels of senility, through Alzheimer's, dementia, and whatnot, or just memory loss, that smells can help bring back memories, and not just memories, but the emotions attached to them, because they're so impactful, and a smell can really imprint on our brains. I mean, if you're walking through this little hamlet and you describe that you smell a warm apple pie on the windowsill, that might remind you as a player of apple pie that you had when you were younger, or it could be an excellent point for a PC. And I'll use one of my characters from the Tuesday game that we run here, which is Bright. And Bright is a vegetarian, and so she doesn't always get the opportunity to just enjoy fruit or veggies. And so if I'm describing an apple pie, I mean, I don't know if Fluffy Sheep, who pilots Bright, is a vegetarian himself, but Bright is. And so to walk through a city and not just have the smell of meat and all this other stuff that would be distasteful to the character, but suddenly, oh, it's dough, and oh, it's these ripe apples and cinnamon and sugar, and suddenly this gnome is just like Looney Tunes, like kind of like being led by your nose, like floating on the wind towards the apple pie in the window.
Well, I mean, this isn't for NPCs, but that's also a really great place to create kind of a good impact of a setting, because you're already familiarizing yourself with, like, oh, it reminds you of, like, apple pie reminds you of being a kid and what that made you start doing. If you start describing in your game, the smell wafts over to you, you get a homey feel instilled inside of your soul. Like, it draws you towards it, even though it is simply just a pie. It is something more to you. That right there gives it, just like we're describing with the NPCs, but also in your narrative, is highly impactful.
So what I've done is I've gone through and I've added on, instead of just something to meet the eye. I think that's it's a good way to get the attention or to convey the point. But really, this is something to stimulate the senses of your player characters.
Yes.
If you're hanging out in the docks, you could describe the smell of the docks as, salt water, fish, maybe even sewage or some other things. But you walk past, or someone walks past you, and they smell like perfume, or like soap, or they actually smell good, or somehow different. Or I don't know, unloading stuff in a. Maybe it's actually a nice day and the breeze has cleared out things, but someone walks by and they actually smell bad. Where were they? Why are they the ones sticking out as smelling good or bad? Do they smell like blood or death? Do they smell like, did they have a rough night and they probably, were vomiting, or they peed themselves in their stupor? It absolutely tells a story.
Oh yeah. And that leads into also another thing. So you have now that grit or that grab of it. Every NPC that you have that's bringing in also have to be part of the environment and impact of the story. So anything that you introduce as a main hooking NPC, they're coming with the event or the reason to pull you in. So that character, his like this stinking character coming from a ship, also has information of what's going on the ship, or maybe there is something like some travesty that's going on that they had to immediately uh, go as fast as they could and couldn't take any breaks, and they needed to get to this port. Maybe it's for some sort of drug run, or maybe some uh, like good deeds. They needed medicine. Who knows what it could be?
Mm-hmm. With that ship story from before, that would be interesting if Pelicans was describing the approach to that ship docked into the harbor. Yeah, I think a lot of people would be expecting the smells of, of like festering and death and gangrene and disease and just sort of like stagnant and rot. And
Oh, definitely.
that could very well get people psyched up, or it gets their adrenaline going. What if on the approach somehow the ship actually smells like fresh baked goods? It smells like rose water, like like the whole place is just sort of bust out into exotic orchids, and it actually smells beautiful.
Yeah, those damn pixies at it again.
The Fae can be terrifying. Yeah, you're braced for undead, and suddenly it's the Fae, and they'll zombies, they'll eat your brain, but the Fae just want to pick at it and play with it because it's fun, and they'll remove it, but they'll play with it and even show you that they're playing with it before they put it back in, and let you go again, maybe. Um, Flesh them out a little. Motivation, personality, history, relations. What are the dead carrying a letter? Dating the letter 50 years ago could be a profound effect. You do. I don't know if you wanted to go to that other consideration just yet. But you did mention, what do they carry? A mark, an item, or something. If you don't want to go to that yet, and we're still talking about ways, something that grabs the eye, and I do want to tie it back real quick because last night we were talking about this one-shot campaign, and I think we can reference back to that as we make content for it. That image of the red dragon head in a cart that's tipped over, that alone is very evocative. But the image also can't do things like describe the sound. Are there a bunch of birds present in chatting and tweeting? Is everything quiet? And if so, why? Is the wind blowing through the snow-covered trees? Is the dragon head smelly because it's rotting? Or does it have a smell? Or should it smell but it doesn't? Which is even more curious or suspect. So there's even more description we can add to such an evocative image.
Oh, definitely. And yeah, what you'll kind of notice with what we're going over, all this will definitely lead to one another. All these things will cross over, because you can't make a campaign without an NPC, without monsters or anything like that. So it should go together like bread and butter. But the kind of what I was saying with the carrying a mark or an item, the key word in that is carrying. And what I mean by that, you don't need necessarily an item on them, but just how they carry themselves will be very impactful as well. If a guy walks with a swagger, or uh, a woman comes across in a fine gown, very elegantly swaying across the sands. The thing is those, just with that, is going to be very impactful. But of course, items, marks, or something like that are really good indicators to players, especially when they're hunting something down, or find the woman with the yellow feather, like we were talking before. But that leads into one another, and like you can't have the marks without building the description of the character, and also getting into like the items as well. Simple things like a blackened blade instantly makes someone stand out, or like you said, someone smelling of death, but the thing is they're carrying around a butcher's cleaver. That right there is like red flag, like watch out for this dude. But yeah, go with the simple things, and also very impactful stances and items that particularly like people will represent more power or more passive type things. Someone walking around and controlling a group wearing common clothes, but they all respect them, is going to make them stand out as somewhat of a very powerful individual or someone that is revered.
Body language is really big, and especially because some people might play with passive insight, or let alone the insight skill existing. Body language can tell a story all on its own. Someone can wear the uniform of, you know, the chief of the guards, but if they don't carry themselves with what you might expect to be the swagger or the confidence, that could indicate something's wrong with the person, or it could indicate that's not the person because they're not carrying themselves as someone should otherwise.
Oh, definitely.
And so
also,
what they can carry is themselves, their demeanor, their attitude.
oh, definitely a presence, and also that gives you probably one of the more overlooked things that uh, people don't really mess with in D&D all that much, but you can get into the religion and the charisma-based deception and your insights and stuff like that, and really start getting uh, checks going on, and the side of the gameplay that you don't usually see because combat is usually king. Uh, but yeah, like this is that's a perfect way to open essentially rolling and people thinking outside of the box and how they can interact with it. And now you're actually baiting the hook. Uh, and I think we're doing two really big purposes here, because the more you as a DM start describing, the more it's going to instill the character to you. So you have a better chance of becoming that character and understanding who they are. And then your players in that same likeness are understanding your story a little bit more in depth. So that right there is going to make your NPC pop, because you're more involved and understand the character, and then they have more to interact with because you know it.
Reading chat here, Princess says, or in my party, where they're sent to capture a female criminal, and because the picture I used was a little cute, this is apparently the party saying she's being framed, she can do no wrong. Princess, you ran into a place where you're trying to invoke the senses, and it seemingly you were able to pierce the fourth wall, and and your players are being manipulated, not intended by you, not intended by you, but suddenly, yeah, apparently they're willing to suspend disbelief just because you used a particular image that really resonated with the players.
I can say one of the most iconic horror characters in my regular Halloween game that stood out and kind of took the show was a doll named Juju. And no one wanted to mess with that doll. It was a mix between Chucky and Jigsaw, constantly wanting to play a game and mess you up.
Oh. And when you say that as well, I mean, you say Chucky and Jigsaw, that could be in personality, even in appearance. I'm thinking kind of wild orange hair, with a very pale face and red swirls on the cheeks. But that's, I mean, that was what immediately came to my mind. Could you describe the character then? Like, you've already invoked imagination. You've already sunk the hook. Now reel the fish in. You've described in a couple words this NPC. Now bring it home for us, if you don't mind.
As you notice this character move through the hall, its steps sound out of place. It's almost as it echoes louder and smaller at the same time, and the shadow that is cast is not of its own. Something is instilled deep in this creature or object, something that is more than itself, as you hear it cry out, "Want to play a game?" That right there is going to really get that story going across. You're seeing the hall, you're seeing the shadow that doesn't line up, sounds aren't working right, and you already know what that person's going to say. And actually, less is more if you keep on repeating, like, "Want to play a game," and then it just gets more and more psychotic. That's just going to emphasize something's not right.
I like it. And I will say, while it was completely coincidental, as you were finishing up your description, the background music was building to a crescendo as well. And it was getting, like, really intense as you were describing the character. And then right as you finished, the music fell off, and there was just like a distant echoing sound of hammers.
Awesome. Sometimes life just wins.
So we want to, when we're creating NPCs, we want to consider what is going to make this NPC, or even if you're talking about a group, why are these town guards different than if I just say town guard? Because, you know, just saying town guard could invoke, it's the local, it's the young farmer's son who, you know, is trying to be taught responsibility. So he wears his mom's cooking pot on his head, and he has a fire-hardened pointy stick as a spear. And that could be a town guard. So too could a Waterdeep guard that actually has crafted armor and good weapons, and has carries, for a metropolitan area, carries immense authority, and isn't some local yokel as well. And both of these are town guards. You know, so we want to say what kind of town guard, or how are they going to stand out? And in the group, is there one in particular that is going to be approachable, or we want to create a psychological device for our characters, by a catchphrase, by a demeanor. You know, are they always chewing on a piece of wheat? Do they have a particular accent or something along those lines? Are they dressed impeccably? You know, do they have any markings such as tattoos, religious iconography that you talked about? You know, in some cases, you may see someone approach you that wears a holy symbol. I mean, this is in real life or in fantasy. Someone approaches you wearing the symbolism or the garb of a particular faith or philosophy, and this can start telling you a story about who they are and what you might be able to expect. And it's a good indicator, you know, so that this is something, maybe a series of beliefs this person holds. Or, boy, if it's someone who's wearing the 3 blue stripes on the forehead, then that means that I must always end my sentences with respectfully, because maybe that is a culture that reinforces respect, and so they include respect in every aspect. And it's a good role playing challenge, but it's also, it creates a culture, it creates a very interesting NPC.
Well, and it actually bridges the gap of one of the harder things that I've noticed that DMs kind of either go full bore or don't know how to interact with, but is bringing the deities into your game. Having like really the markings, the symbols, and everything like that. They D&D is full of symbols for all their deities and certain garbs that they would have to wear, and not to mention all the different cults. Uh, there is plenty to work with, and kind of bridging that gap, you can lead one into another and bring in kind of the politics that comes with it.
I'd argue
But I
that's
was
why having the knowledge, well, it's no longer knowledge religion, but that's why the religion skill could provide you with so much information about languages and cultures and dress and demeanor, and maybe not history as it would be, sort of secularized or described in a literal sense, but through symbolism or code. There's just so much about a person, a region, a city, if they are a part of a faith of some kind, that it just bleeds through so many different layers of society.
Oh yeah, and we're talking very subtly also, because like just simple markings and stuff like that, but also iconic moves and over the top characters, and no better place to look than pro wrestlers.
Ah,
Something is, I mean, let's take The Rock. He's probably the most famous one, but the people's elbow, and like it's just a move, but it has like it's iconic. It's to the character. The way that he lifts up his eyebrow that makes him stand out.
yes.
Like all those things, like they're they're very good at branding themselves in that business and making things very iconic. Um, you can have, and it would make total sense that there would be some characters out there that, from the very subtle hag that's over in the corner just counting her beads, is very impactful as much as a bowl in a china shop, if you need to take that approach.
And if we use that technique that you were describing last night, the three whys, and now of
Mm-hmm.
course that's more for the DM side, but it could be carried over to the player characters. If
Mm-hmm.
your DM is describing a scene, ask the whys, because hopefully your DM can answer them. Why is that? Why is this woman counting beads? Because that might stand out, especially if it's not an arts and crafts store, where it might otherwise be appropriate. It's not like there's a group event going on of necklace making. Why is this person rocking back and forth counting beads? Methodically,
Exactly.
or the language, if there's even an intelligible language behind it.
And
Things happen for reasons.
that's actually a really good point for DMs, and also perspective from the players. If you're already asking yourself why, and you preparing the game, you're like, oh, I want to know why this is going on, and you kind of go down a rabbit hole. Answer those questions for yourself, because if you have them, more than likely your players will have that question too. So it's kind of a preemptive strike to already be guessing what type of attack may happen. But I will say, even as impactful as your NPC will be, or the story might take it, your players might not go for it. So I would say like the best thing to do is have about 3 individuals that give a little bit of a descriptive story that can all lead to a similar hook, because they all act different, look different, but they all deliver the same message. is a really good kind of trick in D&D as well. So you still get to do the scenario that you want, but the players kind of go through the door they want to choose.
If I can toot my own horn, then, for any of you who've been around for the past couple weeks on the Tuesday campaign that we run here, in the wake of what Technatron is going over and just said, I would challenge you to think back to the captors of the party that's in the desert right now. And especially, Technatron said 3 different layers, and we can break this up in a couple ways. There were 3 more distinct NPCs that were holding this half of the party captive. There was Commander Lily, and then there was the magic user, and then there was the cleric, who each carried themselves in a different way and had a different feel. Or you could look at it this way. Commander Lily, or Commander Willie, because the northern accent has a refined pronunciation of L's and R's. And they don't expect Southerners to be able to pronounce them correctly. And so to the Southerners, the Northerners sound perhaps a whittle behind on their speech patterns. However, to the Northerners, this is a refined language and a speech pattern befitting an imperial tongue. And so here we have Commander Lily, and then I would look at the strata. If she's the top, look at the other people who've been in a position of command. So that would be magic user and cleric / doctor. And then look at the way that the bulk soldiers were presented on Tuesdays, and the way that they would carry themselves with their speech and body language at all these levels. So thank you for. I mean, we didn't collude on this. This wasn't some grand scheme that I'm suddenly cinching up together in front of everyone. Mwahaha. But if you look back through it on Tuesdays, I hope you all can see that what Technatron's talking about. I may not call it what he is, and that's the beauty of having him on this show, because I may do things for a reason, but I don't call it the same, or I don't even have a name for it. And here Technatron's coming in and dropping just, vocab and concept bombs on us and improving our lives.
Well, thank you so much.
It looks like I missed a little bit in chat here while I was on my soapbox.
Well, I was going to say, someone said only one rule. I think it would be interesting if what popped to mind was just saying that. What is one rule that you would give to both DMs and players to go by, that just to get into a game and kind of the play dynamic? If you only had one rule for D&D, what would it be?
Don't separate yourself. Oh, I mean, iTyrant, that's a very good rule. Have fun, and Ozzy seems to back that up. Geez, now I feel bad because that should have been, I'm double guessing myself. I mean, obviously, yes, have fun. I would say, at least for presentation of a character, and I would hope having fun doing it this way would be intrinsic. Don't use a tone that separates you from your character. Don't say, my character picks up the hammer. Don't say, the elven guard yawns at her station. Don't present it like it's somehow not a part of who we are or what's happening. Use an active voice. You don't have to name every guard, but give that reinforcement descriptor. I mean, even if you just say, the guard by the stand appears sleepy as she's yawning. And from there, after you set that foundation, you could maybe refer to her as the sleepy guard, or the formerly sleepy guard if maybe she was addressed by a superior. Of course, then that expresses the personality of her commander, and not just the leader town guard. And also don't say my character. Use your character's name, or, arguably better, I. And refer to the other players by their character names to help reinforce you're in the story. You're not separated from it.
Oh yeah. That's kind of close to what I would give too. I've actually thought of this question before, and the one thing that I give anyone that's in a role playing game is play with what's at hand, not with what you think you know. So if your DM calls for a wisdom check when it should have been Constitution, play up the fact that like it's a wisdom based thing and you're completely confused by it, and roll with that as kind of what's going on. You can always hint to the DM, why did you do that? But also on that same thing, if the DM rolls with that it was a wisdom check, might lead to some of the best like situations out of something that was a complete mistake, because it gives the opportunity to let the game be really creative and no one's really questioning why that happened. It's more, well, it's here, what are we going to do with it?
James had said there's a rule of 3. They kill the first, ignore the second, and hopefully get the message by the third. And I get the concept you're going for, where the first presentation may not catch with a group. And the second time it happens, so what? We ignored or dealt with the first one. This is just a thing. But then they see this strange thing or this interesting description a third time. And the rule of 3 is more of a natural rule, where broadly, conceptually, I don't know, some other qualifier I'll insert in there. Having something happen 3 times in a row, like in a measured stance, is not natural. You know, obviously, it takes 2 points to make a straight line, and a rock can wash up against another rock and form a line that was completely random. But the chances of a third rock washing up on a beach that matches the line of the other 2 rocks, all of a sudden, that can trigger something in our minds. There's a pattern. And going back to my sentiment, and Age of Tesla was doing a good job trying to test that, or to test the concept, we start developing a story and not just a signal. And now all of a sudden, if there's 3 rocks in a row, something's going on. This is not a coincidence. There's a pattern. There's a will. There's something behind it. And I should pay attention.
Well, I can give something that will solve that problem and Ozzy's problem as well. And this is, if you're ever playing in person, and I've done this, a Nerf gun is your best friend. Oh, you don't want to pay attention to the first NPC now, do you? Oh, you're looking at your cell phone? And maybe inspiration, you'll let someone take control of the gun or something like that. But it's definitely a good way to go about it. And I will also say, like, with the first rule that, like, or the question that I had, have fun. I think it's also a good understanding to kind of get into. D&D isn't always going to be fun. There's going to be bad days. There's going to be good days. All sorts of inconsistencies, because that's just life. But probably the best thing to realize as a DM and also as a player, we're getting a little off topic, but one of the better things to realize is if you're human, you're going to understand that there's things like sadness, there's sickness, and all these other things that go along with having like a happy life, and for you to say that you only have a happy life, that would almost be strange and alien. So if you are sick, kind of like you have this snuffles right now and
Yeah.
stuff like that, well, what do? You probably have rituals that make it so when you're sick, it's not so bad. You have your tissues, or you have a medicine that you take, and you get through that time. Well, in those sadder sessions or sessions that aren't exactly running very right, what are the tools that you have in place that will make it easier for you to get through? And I would even say apply that to your life.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it, imagine yourself preparing for situations that are part of life, just like our in game will get you really far along. Yeah, cookies, fantastic.
I do bring what I call pre-apology cookies to my Tomb of Annihilation sessions. In fact, we mostly lost another character in the tomb tonight. And by the way, tonight's cookies were chocolate chip. Um, hey, Cake Boss, welcome. And I would like to say here and now, everyone, if any of you out there consider me at least a halfway decent DM, thank you. And I will stand before you. I will put my right hand over my heart, and I will look into the camera and say, my name is Matty Morgs, and I have run poop sessions of D&D before, where it didn't feel cohesive. It didn't feel like I did a good job, or I thought I presented something that I thought would have been cool, and it didn't resonate, and it was just sort of meandering, kind of awkward, or the energy was really low. And it happens. And,
Uh,
and you're talking about rituals or getting through it. And you're absolutely correct, Technatron. Anytime that I run a poop session, I want to confront it, but my personality is such that I want to sit back for a couple days, analyze it, maybe solicit a couple opinions privately, and then address it. After I've had time to cool off, make sure I'm not going to say or do anything reactionary. And also give me time to kind of recover, because that could take a lot of wind out of your sails, right? I mean, just like it being sick, this absolutely sucks, and this is just a minor cold. But constantly blowing my nose and clearing my throat amid all this other stuff. And I understand this is first world problems. Oh, I have a cold. How terrible. My life is ending. But just something like that can really take the wind out of your sails when you aren't expecting it. And so you want to recover and move on. And so in my own methodology, that's how I cope, or that's how I... those are my cookies. We could use that as the example. Those are my cookies.
and just remember, people, 100 bits a day can save Maddie's life.
I very much appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, speaking of getting sick, as I do have every intention on flying out to California, thanks to people's support here on the channel in September for TwitchCon. I hope I don't get confunk while I'm out there, or catch something on the plane. I'll have to make sure I'm loading up on my zinc and vitamin C.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was also gonna say, yeah, I'll put one of my horrible sessions. I had a session where I straight up got so frustrated with the group where I told them, I'm leaving right now, or else I'm going to completely destroy the campaign. And I had to walk away from the table.
Yep. The circuit breaker. Yep.
Yeah. Like, I was just like, can't do this. And I was completely honest with them. But yeah, I left them high and dry.
Did you cool off and go back, or was that it? And it was just sort of an amicable split?
Oh, no, I went back. I actually played that out because I have a little bit of an ego, I guess, where I'm like, I can make any player have fun, and I will make it work out. I have like that super can-do attitude, and yeah, no, that player was, oh, I can go into it, but that was a rough batch.
Ozzy had asked a question a little bit above, and I know this is going to link into something that we can get into now, or that we're going to get into a little bit later. But Ozzy had asked, how would you roleplay a female character? I do not do it well with RPing female voices, and things can get weird really fast. And James was giving some advice in reply to that. Do you want to hold on to that question for? Do you want to hold on to that question for that point, or do you want to use it as a segue? Really, this is, in all honesty, everyone, this is the Technatron show, and I'm riding shotgun.
Oh no, and it's fine. And we can kind of take bits and pieces, but yeah, female characters, I understand that's very weird and like not normal, but um, people, no matter what you're doing, will generally like they're okay with it as long as it isn't like insulting them or going after the, like you're just straight up uh, being obnoxious. Generally, no matter what you do, people are going to be, at least at the table, completely okay with it. And if anything, they're going to start coming out of their shell and start entertaining the idea that they might put on their rap folk voice or whatever it is. And that actually creates a more immersive game. And yeah, I've had situations where I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable, but push through, give it your best. I've had fails when it comes to NPCs where I was constantly, went in with this perfect voice and I was like, that's who that NPC is, and then like 10 minutes later I forgot what they sounded like. So I probably went from like a Scottish accent, really hard dwarven, like this, and then all of a sudden, the next thing I knew, I was giving them a Boston accent. But you can actually play that up if you can kind of take the wind out of your own sail. It's kind of a comedic, real thing on stage. If you can point essentially the gun at yourself, like people are totally okay with it. You're like, oh, today this guy is a little bit schizophrenic. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
People are usually more than fine. Or the fact that you're just trying to play an old woman or something like that. There's no problem.
A good way to practice would be start small and list something out in front of you. Put old man voice, police commander voice, or like like army drill sergeant voice, and I don't know what would be another one. A sympathetic bartender. It could be anything really. I just kind of came up with 3 things off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. And then Ozzy, what you can do is say, all right, there are these 3. I want to create 3 tones or 3 modes. And I'm going to practice my old woman voice today. And then I'm going to practice the next day my old woman voice. But then I'm going to try drill sergeant. And then the next day or week or however long, you now have worked out 3 different concepts for voices. And if you have those understood, suddenly you have a very good quick default. If you're describing an NPC as an old woman, yeah, you can use your old woman voice, no problem. Because you remember old woman, you've practiced old woman before.
But if she's a creepy old woman, it's easy to have the mentality and simply slow down your words or crack your voice.
But now you can modulate old woman into a variety of other other representations. And so suddenly now you have creepy old woman, you have absolutely adorable, apple pie granny, and then you just have, kind of old woman that might be a little bit more dusty or austere, that would be more like, a librarian, or someone in a position of austere authority, like a prime minister, or someone who carries herself more stiffly. She can still have a crack in her voice if you wish, but she speaks much more methodically, and she isn't afraid to use strong language, such as heck or darn.
And I'll even throw in a good 2 cents too if you're like voice acting and stuff like that. Putting your body in positions, so essentially slouching over or standing up, like with your shoulders back and kind of mimicking it, it's going to do two things. It's going to open and compress your airways and actually make the voice sound a little bit different from you, but also that will fortify like kind of how you're thinking as the NPC or that character, because you're essentially putting yourself in the shoes. And then also a really great thing is normally everybody wants to get the perfect Arnold or the perfect Keanu Reeves accent. Well, if you're horrible at accents or mimicking famous people, you are a fantastic voice actor for a random NPC or anything like that, because no one's going to know what it is, and you're trying your hardest at it, and it's going to sound completely unique. And so your Arnold is the perfect king and sounds completely your own, and you couldn't help but make it your own Chopper, if you will. So that's a really good thing. Try to mimic people or celebrities, but
Yep.
do it in your own way.
And the posture is important. If any of you saw, I was leaning forward. I was kind of hunched in my old woman voice on camera. And if I do drill sergeant voice, which I prefer not to do because I don't want to blow out what little function my throat currently has right now. A very good example, watch Full Metal Jacket and Lee Army. When he speaks and shouts, he is back. He is squared up on the people to whom he's addressing. Shoulders are up, arms are back, presenting a front. This opens up. This allows you to project your voice. I do a mean Don Knotts and an okay Bill Clinton, and you know what, Black Wolf? Use those as reference points. And say, okay, so this character, I'm going to default to my concept of a Bill Clinton voice, except it's it's drunken Bill Clinton, or it's super excited like a newborn kitten Don Knotts, things like that. And so use these touchstones, use these reference points, and modulate from there because you're already comfortable with that presentation.
Well, and another thing that's also a really good tool is thinking of accents that you know and then trying to mix them will give a completely unique voice. Mannerisms and stuff like that, talking softer or lighter and giving accents to different essentially speech patterns. Those are all really fun tools to use for texturing and creating new characters.
There's that T word again. And I'll even say, to bring it back to last night, Technatron, what you're talking about goes back to the fundamental of rehash and reuse.
Mm-hmm.
Use that Arnold accent. It's an excellent gateway to try and convey a character who comes across as stronger or more, projecting. You can make it a comedic accent still. but you're delivering a concept by this, and so it's not Arnold's accent. His accent is his own, and in all honesty, his accent has changed over the years. You know, from if you watch movies when he's younger. I mean, heck, for a while they had to have people dub over him because his Austrian accent was so thick. And now he's very intelligible. You know, there's still a little bit of a one, and I kind of have to wonder if sometimes if he doesn't play that up. But you know, it's an Arnold accent, not the, because he has his own. This is your iteration. Just like you want to tell Lord of the Rings, you want to tell a story. You know, do you want to tell a story from the Bible, but rehash it as a D&D adventure, just like Lord of the Flies does? You know, through symbolism, through other presentations. It's taking these stories that exist, you know, Aesop's fables, Greek mythology, Grimm's fairy tales and such, and it reuses it. And it has a touchstone. It has this point of reference, but it's its own story. You know, we don't look at Lord of the Flies, at least not out of the gate, as some sort of like a biblical allegory. Although it could be. It's Lord of the Flies. It's a story about a bunch of English school kids who got marooned on an island, and how things started out okay, and then their society, quote unquote, just kind of, you know, degenerated as times and mentalities and conditions worsened.
Well, and also you can kind of look at celebrities and kind of how they work. You'll notice they follow a pattern of they either have that extremely unique voice or that feature that stands out that makes them that person and they kind of personify themselves, or they're a character that is very mundane that everyone can relate to. And that's very good for NPCs as well, because like I was talking about, the pro wrestlers, very loud and outlandish, but then also the old lady that's just kind of relatable next to the apple pie. Those are both really good for NPCs in building. But it is getting on the first hour. Do you want to take a break?
Yes, I just had to spam some cat butt first because that's what's currently happening right now.
Fair enough.
Ozzy, I hope that we were able to help you to give you some advice and answer your question as we're going through this NPC content. I do want to get up and refresh myself as my voice is getting a little scratchy. So everyone, why don't we take about a 10-minute break? And when we come back, what topic are we going to get into next as we're talking about making NPCs pop, Technatron?
We will be going over kind of linking more to the story and how the impact and the hook is going to lead back to the one shot we're talking about, or essentially the storyline to the event. And then we'll go into kind of what we're going over now. No shame in acting it out.
Fallon wants us to discuss the topic of fiscal policies in a medieval, like, scarcity-based economy. There will be a test episode. Hey, bring it on, Fallon. I have, look, I didn't get my master's in business for nothing. I'll talk econ all day. But first I'm going to take a break, though. So we'll see you all back in about 10 minutes.
See you soon.